Government is calling on South Africans to check information before sharing it on social media. The South African Police Service also warning that sharing of such information can cause unnecessary panic. With the current high crime statistics, is it natural for the public to believe unconfirmed articles and videos? Well, to look at this further, I'm joined by Chris Lowe from the South African National Editors Forum and Bongani Sibanyoni, Chief Legal Strategist at #Country Duty, and Debo Ditseho, CEO and social media analyst at Ditseho Media, will be joining us shortly. Gentlemen, firstly, thank you for your time. Perhaps let's begin with a very simplistic view of the spreading of false information as it is on social media. It's difficult even for professionals, Chris, sometimes to tell the difference between whether a story is true or fake. How do we even begin to place that responsibility on ordinary South Africans?
Very much so. Good evening. I think that so often these things just keep happening and people don't really understand the consequences thereof. I think that the SAPs have come out and said what they've said now, pretty much because it's struck a tune with the average South African regarding things like child kidnappings, etc., which has become obviously a very emotive topic. So it is, I think, extremely difficult for ordinary South Africans to understand the implications of even clicking that button, and it's become so easy to just share something. We've got to understand that things that exist within social media often take on a fantastical nature due to the viral sort of nature and the engineering behind social media. You know, we want things to go viral, and often the things that go viral should not be going viral, and we've seen that so often. I think for ordinary South Africans, a little bit of advice would be just don't share it if you're unsure. Rather do your research. And that's where the trick comes in. The research is often the most difficult part because you have to go through reams and reams of articles to really understand what exactly is going on. And we can't expect the average South African to always know what's going on. I mean, we see major news institutions around the world struggle with this.
Absolutely. And you bring me to a point of the criteria and also the clicking of that button. We'll come to that a little bit earlier. But part of the reason why it has also become as popular as it is because we're seeing a rise of activism on social media. So often there's no malice intended in some of what's being shared. People genuinely believe that they're helping, spread awareness about a missing child or, a hotspot, a carjacking hotspot. And that's part of where #Country Duty comes in, right?
Yes, most definitely. So, I mean, you are absolutely correct. Sometimes the sharing does come from a good place. It comes from a genuine heart, someone who's actually trying to assist or trying to help. However, as Chris was just saying now, it's easy to end up spreading fake news, unintended, by the way. So from a country duty point of view, we have a small organization of people that we work with who actually are responsible for verifying some of the information that we have to share to the public. Because to your point, social media, there's no editorial gatekeeper. It's not like your normal news agents where you have an editor that will check the story, they will fact check before the story goes out. It's easy to click a button and to actually share.
But in terms of an organization like Country Duty,
yes.
What are the processes that you go through? Because at the end of the day, people come to your account, not necessarily because they are expecting that whatever is there is absolutely true, but it's a matter of conviction. You're followed by people who believe that they get a picture of South Africa that they won't get on any other platform. But how much responsibility do you take then for verifying everything that comes on your feed? And I mean everything.
Everything.
And this is a trick question, so be careful of your answer.
So we do our best. I think what I can say is, the spreading of fake news didn't start with social media. Let's start there. We've seen lots of newspapers apologizing for, putting news that was incorrect out there. So the advent of social media has obviously made the matter to spiral out of control. So what we do from a Country Duty, I'm a legal strategist for Country Duty, right? So one of my responsibilities as part of the organization is before we post anything, it needs to come to me. First of all, I need to look at the potential legal consequences if this is incorrect. correct. So if I'm posting something that's factually inaccurate, or we posting something as Country Duty that's factually inaccurate, it could come back to the members of Country Duty, right? You could be held accountable. So you could post something that ends up inciting violence, for example, and that will give the police a right to come after you, as an example. So you have me, who's a chief legal strategist, but what we also have, we have a network of seasoned journalists who assist us in terms of verifying some of the information that we get. So you might get a story that comes to us and somebody will hashtag and say, Bongani, this is a story that I want you guys to assist me with. What we'll do is, like I said, I'll look at it from a legal strategy point of view, and then I'll tap into the network of people that we have in Country Duty and say, X, Y, and Z, can you please check this, fact check this for me before we go public? And to be honest, we have been caught with our pants down. Now and again, we've apologized to the public, where one of our members maybe has run with a story before they've verified it. And that does happen, and you need to take accountability for it when it happens, because you're only as good as your last tweet. Right.
All right. Let me bring into the conversation here the CEO of Ditego Media, Deborah Ditego, who's just joined us. Deborah, you have social activism platforms like Country Media. You have official traditional news media, if I can put it that way, who are active on social media. Is there a way of distinguishing between the two? And do you think that the public can distinguish between what Country Duty is producing and the news value of it, as opposed to what an ENCA would be putting out there?
That's a very good question, Kathy, and I think it's important for us to be able to distinguish between a source that is credible and a source that might not be credible. What we do as a public relations agency is that we look at, is it coming from a primary source or is it a secondary source? Now, people who haven't done research level of education at school wouldn't necessarily know how to distinguish between the two. So a primary source would be a first-hand account. It would be like an eyewitness. A secondary source is anyone who's not giving a first-hand account. Now, if you look at a news organization, most of the time they are secondary sources. Sometimes they are the eyewitnesses, but because there's not many resources to go around, they can't be sending journalists everywhere. So what a person who is an ordinary member of social media must do is to evaluate the credibility of the source. That could be perhaps if it's a verified account, or look at the track record of the account. Do they have a track record of sharing credible information? And after you've done that, what you do then is try to verify it from multiple sources. I would say at least 3. If you're talking academic level, it's 10. So try to verify the information. Now, what you could do also, like when we had the issue of the xenophobic attacks, you had people sharing pictures that were not from the xenophobic attacks, which made it even worse for South Africa and our reputation.
They weren't even from South Africa.
They weren't even from South Africa. Now, what you could do in that instance is take that image, go onto Google and say, reverse image search, take the image there, and they'll tell you when the image was first posted. Now, how that helps you is that if they said there was a xenophobic attack today, if the image is from 2002, then you could say, no, this is not credible.
But of course, part of the difficulty also is that on social media, often, you're targeted by different people who are on the internet, according to different algorithms. So all you need is actually a friend of a friend of a friend to have shared it with a friend of a friend of a friend for it to end up on your feed. And out of curiosity, you may click. And unfortunately, what that algorithm does is that it means that you will now be receiving over and above what you had intended of that thing, which in fact might not be real news, might be fake news, or might just be misinformation across the board. So how do we protect ourselves, Chris, against that algorithm, which in fact people don't have control over?
I'm really glad that you mentioned the word algorithm, because it does tie in to a degree what Tebogo was talking about. And the phrase echo chambers, I believe, is extremely important here. Tebogo, the intention of what you're saying is great. However, the average South African there is no way that person will go to that level of research. And I'll give you a good example. Currently, there's a story making the rounds that China is going to seize Zambia's main airport.
Yeah.
The same way that they seized Sri Lanka's port.
Yes,
okay.
Yes.
It took me a long time to figure out why they seized the Sri Lankan port. I had to read a New York Times article of an excess of 5,000 words to figure out what exactly had happened in the seizure of that port. And there was a lot of mismanagement and deals that were done incorrectly. So this fear that Zambia's airport is going to go is completely false. And it's based on the notion that an action happened somewhere, yet the detail was never really provided to the average South African.
Although in fairness, much of how that narrative plays itself out
Yes.
will be due to politicians
Sure.
and how a narrative
And
develops
dodgy
from there
deals.
on.
So there are
Yeah.
certainly parallels between those, but this is where fake news becomes so tricky because those parallels get twisted, and the minute it gets twisted, it starts becoming a totally different story. And just back to your point around echo chambers, right? So we live in echo chambers in our real lives, but social media really exacerbates those echo chambers and feeds us what we want to hear, gives us what we want to see, doesn't challenge us in a way that we maybe should be challenged, but rather polarizes us so that we spend more time on the platform so that more money can be generated. So that algorithm is actually a really terrible thing in terms of research, looking broader, finding sources that maybe you don't find on a regular basis. So it's that thing of engaging with the internet on a much broader scale other than just your Facebook feed, which is going to be filled with enablers or people that are like-minded and that are going to agree with your racist comments or your fake comments or your xenophobic comments.
I must say that oftentimes, even when you are intentional about going, beyond the feed that the algorithm is giving you, what you'll find out there also looks good because oftentimes you judge the credibility of a website by how organized it looks and everything looks intact. They're becoming pretty slick. So what criteria then should we look at and say, actually, maybe I shouldn't share this because I might get into trouble? I mean, it's as easy. It can even be NGOs, fake NGOs that are formed. You see a statistic about children that are being kidnapped and you think, I want to help. But meanwhile, it's a non-existent organization.
Yeah, so, I mean, and I'll talk from personal experience. Sometimes all you have to do on social media is to read the comments before you even post something. So I've found a lot of the times, actually, that if you read the comments, somebody has already said this is fake. But what we do is we see it and we just click like or we click send to someone else. And sometimes, really genuinely, you just read the comments before you actually comment. And you will find that somebody has actually told you whether this is fake or not. So it's that extra effort that you have to put in. Right? And to Debs' point, it might mean that you need to do a bit more research, right? It might be, you need to go to Google and do actually search whether this story has been reported before. We've seen so many fake stories that have been reported for the past 10 years, and they're reported as if it's today's story. And sometimes you just need to do that extra layer. To protect yourself, to be honest.
Okay, can we change that algorithm lastly once, Twitter or Facebook or Instagram has decided it knows what you like and it's going to give you more of what you want? Can you change it?
You can't. Unfortunately, the more sensational the thing you're saying is the higher it's going to be seen by people. And people are not dumb. They realize this and they exploit it. So what we need to do is understand what are the consequences in terms of the objectives that we have as a nation and your personal career objectives. You would know that legally speaking, some people don't even know that you can be held responsible for what the people said in the comment section, not even what you said. And so you would have to then delete, the post because you've kind of led them astray. And maybe you weren't explaining something clearly. We have a case which was recently finalized where someone was found guilty of crimen injuria, because of what the people who commented said. And it was a subtweet. They didn't mention anybody. So we need to understand the consequences. But I think the main topic here, I think, is that people need to try to verify the information and look at the track record of the person who's posting.
And certainly, I think this would be one of the few instances where an opportunity to punt traditional media would come in because, one may disagree with different angles that are chosen by media houses, but certainly traditional media sources are always a good checking point, especially if something sounds like it's too out of the ordinary. So if it's too bad or too good to be true, chances are it is. Tabo Ditshego, his CEO and social media analyst at Ditshego Media, Chris Lowe from the South African National Editors Forum, and Bongani Sibanyoni, who's the chief legal strategist at #CountryDuty.